Thank you very much. And now we're going to hear some closing comments before the questions from the floor, beginning with Dr. Craig for 7 minutes, and then Dr. Atkins for 7 minutes.
In my closing statement, I would like to draw together the threads of this debate and summarize the arguments that have been presented. The question facing us tonight was, what was the evidence for and against the existence of God? And I think it's been very evident in tonight's debate that Dr. Atkins, by his own admission, has been unable to shoulder his share of the burden of proof in providing any argument, any evidence against the existence of God. He's only been able to argue that the God postulate is unnecessary, or that my arguments do not prove God. But remember, as Professor Nielsen stated, the failure of an argument to prove a conclusion doesn't show that that conclusion is false. So even if all my arguments fail, at best we're left with agnosticism. And we have not heard any evidence tonight that God does not exist. Now, what about the arguments I gave that God does exist? Well, I think that these arguments still stand. First, the argument from the origin of the universe. We saw that Dr. Atkins agrees that whatever begins to exist has a cause. Secondly, the universe began to exist. He agrees. He doesn't agree that the universe has a cause, however, because he doesn't think that the universe exists. He thinks there is nothing. And I pointed out why this is fallacious. First of all, it is fallacious because even though you have a balance of positive and negative energy, that doesn't mean that there is therefore no energy. If you have a jar of electrons with negative charge and a jar of positrons with positive charge, and they exactly cancel out, does that therefore mean there is no energy? Well, obviously not. There is still something. Secondly, I quoted Christopher Isham to point out that even if there is no material cause of the origin of the universe, you still need to have a productive cause to bring the positive and negative energy into being, and he doesn't deny the point. Thirdly, I argued that if Dr. Atkins really is saying that nothing exists, then this is self-evidently absurd, because I at least exist, and that's undeniable. If he backs off and says, however, no, there is something now, then the argument comes into play that if there is something, that whatever begins to exist therefore has a cause. There must be a transcendent cause of the universe. And I argue that this cause must be timeless, changeless, immaterial, and personal. None of those arguments were ever attacked tonight. So I don't think that Dr. Atkins has succeeded in proving that God does not, or rather that my arguments fail to show that God exists. On the contrary, all he's offered is a self-contradictory alternative, metaphysical mumbo-jumbo about mathematical points coming into existence and bringing space and time into being, an account which simply cannot be true. Secondly, what about the complex order in the universe? I argued, number one, that the fine-tuning of the initial conditions is due to either law, chance, or design. Secondly, I argued that it's not due to law or chance. I pointed out that his reasoning to try to show it could be by chance was simply based on an incorrect analogy concerning the lottery. He didn't deny the point. I gave 4 reasons why the God hypothesis is superior to the many worlds hypothesis. He didn't offer any refutation of any of those. And finally, I argued that there is no theory of everything that would show that in addition to natural laws, that these initial conditions and quantities are physically necessary. So that the design hypothesis is really the only explanation that seems to be tenable. There is an intelligent designer of the world. Thirdly, I argued that the presence of objective moral values points to God. We agreed that if God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist. But I argued, secondly, that it's evident that there are objective moral values. Remember John Healy's statement about torture, government-sanctioned murder, what the Nazis did in the Holocaust, ethnic cleansing in Bosnia, the killing fields of Cambodia. It seems to me that it is evident that there is really right and wrong. And if that is true, and if you agree with that point with me tonight, then you will agree with me that therefore God exists. Fourth, as to the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, Dr. Atkins simply said that we shouldn't believe the messenger. We should always disbelieve the messenger rather than believe the miracle. And it seems to me that this is simply an incorrect and fallacious argument. The hypothesis that God raised Jesus from the dead is not improbable. What is improbable is that Jesus rose naturally from the dead. And I would agree with him that any hypothesis is more probable than that. Conspiracy, illusion, lying, anything is more probable than that the cells of Jesus' body all spontaneously came back to life again. But that's not the hypothesis. The hypothesis is that God raised Jesus from the dead. And I don't think he's shown that that is improbable. Indeed, given the specific evidence agreed to by the majority of New Testament historians, I think that it is quite probable that, in fact, Jesus rose from the dead. R.T. France, who is a New Testament scholar at Oxford, makes the following point. He says, ancient historians, Greco-Roman historians, have sometimes commented that the degree of skepticism with which New Testament scholars approach their sources is far greater than would be thought justified in any other branch of ancient history. So that when you look at these New Testament historians, they are extremely skeptical about their sources, and yet they have been compelled to agree to the empty tomb, the resurrection appearances, and the origin of the disciples' faith. And I know of no plausible naturalistic explanations for those facts. Finally, number 5, the immediate experience of God. Dr. Atkins says, well, this is just a self-delusion. Well, I invite him to prove this. Will he appeal to Freudian psychology? This is clearly jaded and out of date. What will he do to prove that it's delusory? Until he can give me some reason to think God doesn't exist, why should I think my experience of God is delusory? In fact, I myself wasn't raised in a church-going home or in a Christian family. But as a teenager, I began to ask the big questions in life about the meaning of my existence, the purpose of life. And in the search for answers, I began to read the New Testament. And as I did, I was captivated by the person of Jesus of Nazareth. There was an authenticity about this man, a ring of truth about what he said that gripped and captivated me. And to make a long story short, after about 6 months of the most intense soul-searching, I just came to the end of my rope and I cried out to God. I experienced a sort of spiritual rebirth in my life, and God became an immediate reality to me, a reality which has never left me as I've walked with him day by day over the last 30 years. And I want to encourage you as I conclude tonight that if you're seeking for God in that same way, you do the same thing I did. Pick up the New Testament, begin to read it, and ask yourself, could this really be true? I believe it could change your life just as it changed mine.